Hi, I'm Todd Rheingold, the hopeful aspirant. Welcome to another installment of I Got a Testimony. I wanted to talk a little bit today before I get into the interview with my guest, just to mention that I do have a website that I would like you guys to check out. It's thehopefulaspirant.com. And also to remind you, the viewer, that if you have a testimony that you would like to share with me on the air, please get in touch with me at thehopefulaspirant@gmail.com. I'd really like to talk with you. Some of you may be shy about getting on camera, and that's fine. If you would like to just share your testimony, I can read it over the air. As far as the website goes, you can download my book that I wrote recently. It's called The Hopeful Aspirant, My Journey of Faith. You can download it straight off the website as a PDF. And also I have a few t-shirts that you can check out. And with that, I'm going to introduce my first guest. His name is Mehran Ghofrani, and he has a really great testimony that I'm excited about. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Mehran. How are you, sir?
Doing good, doing good. Thank you, Todd, for having me on your show. It's a pleasure being with you. It's always wonderful to reflect on our lives and testify to God's gifts to us and how we are aided in our challenges in our daily lives. I believe God's gifts are always showering on us, and we just have to be conscious to recognize what those are. And even the air we breathe, we should be thankful for, but we take it for granted. And of course, there are some times where things get really rough, and it's when we turn to God for help and guidance and plead God for help. Mm-hmm. I see life as a series of crises and victories. And I believe that it is all the process of growth. And we look at them, if you look at them in the right way, we realize the lessons, the life's lessons. Mm-hmm. So when I look at my life, there's been many occasions that I feel that I was being protected and guided and helped by God, and that I'm particularly thankful for. And I'm sure all of us have these stories that if we reflect, we can remember those stories. I thought maybe I can share the story from my childhood. I am originally from Iran, and my family and I all belong to a religious minority called the Baha'i faith. And the Baha'i faith is the largest minority group, religious group in Iran, and possibly the most persecuted in Iran. So the Baha'i faith is an independent world religion. It's about 177 years old. The Baha'is follow the teachings of Baha'u'llah, who the Baha'is believe is a divine messenger from God, much like Buddha or Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, and so on. The Baha'i faith began in Iran in the mid-1800s when a man named by the name of Bab announced that he had come with a new revelation from God. And the Bab was immediately faced with fierce opposition by the Muslim clerics and religious leaders. And he, along with his followers, were persecuted intensely and were subject to most cruel, punishments, torture, and many were put to death. The Bab, which actually means the gate, he kind of foretold of someone else coming after him, who would come soon after him, and his teachings would be, would lead into peace and prosperity for humanity. The person the Bab was talking about, his name was Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. Baha'u'llah declared in the year 1863, and many people that were following the Bab eventually became followers of Baha'u'llah. Now, the Bab was, because of his teachings, he was arrested, he was beaten, and he was eventually put to death by a firing squad. Close to 20,000 followers were killed in the most horrific ways. The persecution actually still exists today. So like the Bab, Baha'u'llah, which the Baha'is follow, Baha'i means followers of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah also met a lot of opposition. He was first put into prison, he was beaten, he was exiled, and initially he was exiled to Baghdad, which was part of the Ottoman Empire in the 1800s. And later on, he was exiled to a few other places, and he ended up in Akka in Israel. The Baha'i Center right now is in Israel, in Haifa, Israel. As I said, many followers were put to death in very, horrific ways. And my great-grandfather was also one of those that was put to death. And so it was from my mother's side. and another great grandfather, another my mom's side as well, was also put to death. Just to give you background, what did the Baha'is believe that was so, so bad that they had to be tortured? Baha'u'llah basic teaching were that there is only one God. All monotheistic religion believe that. Baha'u'llah taught that there is only one religion, that all religions are essentially common section, essentially are part of the same book. It's like different chapters. God sends his divine teachers at different times to guide humanity. Baha'is work for the promotion of oneness of mankind and unity of mankind. The teachings of Baha'u'llah was very revolutionary at the time. Like, for example, equality of men and women. If you imagine in the Islamic, in the middle 1800s, women had no rights. Harmony between science and religion. Religion can become sometimes very dogmatic, that it kind of rejects science. And to the point where it says, science without religion is materialism, and religion without science is superstition. Another teaching of Baha'u'llah was compulsory education for all, because there is no clergy in the Baha'i faith. Everyone takes responsibility for their own progress. So having a basic education to be able to read and write is very important. And there's many other ones, like independent investigation of truth, that we should all search the truth on our own rather than listen to somebody else telling us what the truth is, or elimination of extreme wealth and poverty. Right? Today we see they have extreme wealth and poverty, many people living in abject poverty, while many people have so much wealth that they can't, they don't know what to do with it. All these teachings was sort of very revolutionary and caused a lot of uproar in Iran at that time. In 1979, where the Islamic Republic was coming into play and there was this revolution occurring, there was this sense of, oh, things are going to go change. And that's when my story kicks in. When I was around 14, some incident happened where a mob kind of formed and it started kind of going around burning Baha'i homes. My uncle, who was living in the outskirts of the town, he invited us to go stay with him so we can be safe. This was a wake-up call for my dad. He basically sent me and my second oldest sister, I have 3 older sisters, to go stay with my older sister that was living in Africa, Liberia at the time. Once the revolution happened, you couldn't just get out because you had to say you're a Muslim, otherwise you won't get a passport. So we kind of left in a nick of time. And I was 14, my sister was 18. Can you imagine leaving our home for the first time, going to a foreign country into Africa? Meanwhile, my parents were still back in Iran. We hear in the news that my aunt and my cousin, along with several other Baha'is, were arrested. Later on, we found out that they had beaten up my aunt. She was in her 50s, beaten up, her bleeding feet and so forth. Unfortunately, they put her to death by hanging along with 9 other women. 2 days later, they had hung my cousin. He was in his 20s. He had finished, a degree in economy from university. My story is that I was able to leave without getting caught and without getting persecuted, and I ended up in a new place. I feel like living in Africa opened new doors for me, seeing life in a new way, seeing my African brothers and sisters, connecting with them there. Years later, my parents came and joined us. I feel like these experiences may look at first like an adversity, but again, the lesson you get out of it, the gift you get out of it, it propels you to a new phase in your life.
How long were you in Liberia?
7 years. I went to high school. I attended a Catholic school, and I had a lot of wonderful friends there. And yeah, about 7 years.
So roughly 1986?
Yeah, 85.
Okay. And then you went to college over in the United States?
Yes, right. That was an interesting also experience. I'd finished high school and I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. I wanted to go to college, but for a couple of years I sort of worked as, just got odd jobs. But then I wanted to extend my education and I didn't know where to go. And at the time there was a Iranian hostage situation with US, so it's very difficult to get visas to come to US. And that was interesting how I formed a bond of friendship with another Iranian family that were living in Liberia, and they're Muslims, not Baha'is. but the gentleman had a very kind heart, and he was able to help me, because he had some connections with the American Embassy, and his son had come there, and he was able to get me admission to school here. And that was also interesting because the visa was not being granted. I kept on going to the embassy that says, no, there's no news from DC. We can't give you a visa. There's no news. And my admission to school was getting very close to being expired. Like 2 days before, almost like God says, you're going. It says, well, no news. I guess we can give you the visa. I was granted the visa, and even the ticket to fly was, kind of came about in a very interesting way. And I was able to fly to come to US. And came to US, and I stayed with my friends for a while. Then again, I found a Baha'i community, and I was staying with different people. And of course, I didn't have a lot of money, so paying for school was difficult. My dad didn't have a lot of means, so I paid for school a little bit, and it got difficult at some points where I would sometimes not have, food to eat. I will have a jar of peanut butter and bag of bread, and just that'd be my food in the back of my old car that someone had given me. So I struggled through those years, and eventually was able to finish school. And at that point, I met my wife, and we got married, and things started to kind of turn for the better. But I'm again grateful.
So where did you end up going to school?
Old Dominion University.
Okay.
Yeah, Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay. And then you majored in engineering, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
And that's what you do now.
That's
So now with engineering, it's pretty broad. I mean, I always think of engineers as being real smart, because don't you guys go to school? You do college in about 5 years instead of 4, right?
I double majored. So usually it's 4, but I double majored. It took me 5 years.
Okay. But engineering itself is a pretty broad field. So, I mean, anything you want to talk about with that? Like any kind of let us know a little bit more about you by letting us know what kind of engineering you're doing.
Yeah. I double majored in electrical and mechanical engineering because I had interests in both. Since I was a kid, I was always loved to tinker with things. So both fields attracted me. That was another, again, interesting thing that happened. I had finished my high school, and my college, and our first child was about to come. And then I was walking, and the dean of the school says, do you want to get into the master's program? And I was just out of nowhere, just jogging, just kind of walking by. And I says, sure. He says, talk to this professor. So I ended up going to the professor and talking to him, and here I went, just kind of a new door opened for me without me even looking for it. And opened a new door for me, and ended up getting my master's as well. So which was great.
Did your employer pay for that?
No, I did the research, so I got a stipend and the bank research work for it. I couldn't afford it at the time.
So you mentioned about the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran. How did that affect your attitude towards religion in general, if at all? And then when you came over to the United States, what are some of the distinctions that you noticed in terms of not only people's attitudes toward the Baha'i faith, but toward religion in general or spirituality? What do you notice as far as the distinctions and whatnot?
Well, of course, the big difference is that, here you can believe whatever you want to believe. No one bothers you.
Now, as far as Iran, have you been, do you still have some family left over there? Or?
No, all my cousins actually are scattered around the world, and they had it more hard than I did. After I left in 1979, the government made it harder for people to leave Iran, especially for non-Muslims or Baha'is, let's say. Because again, if you're a Christian or Jews or under the laws of Islam, you're considered as an older religion, you're accepted. But the Baha'is, in order to get a passport, everyone had to fill up a form, and there's a box that says, what is your religion? If you put anything other than the ones that are accepted, they deny your passport. You can't get a passport. So a lot of people, they end up leaving Iran illegally. Basically through the border, they pay somebody to kind of take them across the border. So my cousins had to leave that under that circumstances.
I was glad you mentioned, because we had talked about it the other day, about the the Baha'i organization being headquartered now in Haifa, Israel, because when I was in Israel in 95, as I mentioned, in Jerusalem, there's like a church for everybody. Every religion that I was aware of, and even some that I wasn't, has a temple in Jerusalem. And a lot of them are side by side. So there's actually a Baha'i temple there. There's Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Coptic, everything was represented there. I believe Rumi was Persian, wasn't he? And Rumi is always cited as one of the most spiritual people. Like anyone who calls himself spiritual knows something about Rumi. I think a lot of these traditions have been forgotten about or tossed aside by people who are so focused on the current state of affairs over there. As a spiritual person yourself, as somebody of a faith that definitely leans towards spirituality, what do you have to say about not just Rumi, but about Iran having that rich cultural tradition?
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, actually, writings, Baha'u'llah in his writings, he recalls that how Iran used to be, Persia was a very powerful empire at some point. I'm sure you're familiar with the biblical story when Nebuchadnezzar that kind of conquered Jerusalem area, and a lot of Jews were taken to Mesopotamia area. It was the Persian king that actually freed them.
Cyrus.
Cyrus, right. That history, that's a rich history.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember having a lot of Jewish neighbors in our neighborhood, which was kind of neat for me, So Iran was considered as one of the most powerful, or Persia, it wasn't called Iran at the time, it was called Persia, one of the most powerful empires at the time.
For my audience who is maybe struggling themselves and they're listening to us right now and they're leaning in, they want to hear what Mehran has to say about what he does for when he's going through a tough time, and maybe they can learn from it. How would you address that?
Sometimes we have to leave things in the hands of God. We can't do anything about it. Just trust that God will guide you. One thing I try to do, not to have expectation, ask God for his will and not what I want, because what I want can be harmful to me,
How do you know when God is answering a prayer or whether it's just your ego running the show? Do you hear the voice of God? Do you feel a spirit move you? How do you communicate in that way where you feel like you've received some kind of instruction?
When I pray, you ask for something, and then you meditate, you sit for an answer to come. It's not necessarily handed down to you like a spoon fed. You arrive because you're opening your soul, because there are also other souls. The Baha'is believe that the next world is all spiritual, and people, holy souls, are all out there in the next world, and it's not like it's someplace else. It's not. They can hear us, they can interact with us.
Right. If
you connect with them, they can help you. They can beseech on your behalf, perhaps in the next world, to alleviate your suffering or open up doors for you in some way. Having the capacity to say, well, it didn't work out, that means God didn't want that for me at this point, and be able to go on and be content with what I have.
What is the main text of the Baha'i faith?
Baha'u'llah, throughout his life, he wrote over 100 volumes of different books. The one that is called the Book of Laws is called Kitab al-Aqdas, or the Book of Laws. That's where the ordinance of the Baha'i faith is in. But Baha'u'llah has written many books that some of them have not been, many of them haven't been translated yet.
If you were to draw upon some of that literature of the Baha'i faith, what are some of your favorite scriptures, and kind of tell us why?
Again, everyone is required to study on their own, and not just the Baha'i faith. I'm encouraged to study Christianity, study Islam, and Judaism, and so forth, because there's truth in all of them. And by understanding, the more you increase your knowledge, the more you understand the essence of the different faiths. You see that we are oneness.
Right.
But I can quote you many small quotes, and like, for example, one that we use a lot is like, the betterment of the world could be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, or truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. Without truthfulness, progress and success in all the worlds of God is impossible for any soul. So there are actually, Baha'is have this curriculum called the Ruhi Institute. This Ruhi Institute started in Colombia in the 90s or earlier. The first book is learning to read a holy text and understanding and internalizing it. The second part is about the power of prayer, how prayer is important in our daily lives to nourish our soul. Like we all are encouraged to have conversation with God, to connect our hearts. And the last part is about life after death, that this world is not the end. Our purpose is not to come here and accumulate wealth and be comfortable and serve ourselves. It's to serve humanity.
What I remember about the few people I knew that were of the Baha'i faith was it's just all about tolerance and appreciating others. And like you said, appreciating others' religions, others' religious prophets.
God sends his teachers. Baha'is are, revere Christ or Moses. We revere those manifestations of God. In a Baha'i faith, God is explained that he's the unknowable essence. We cannot know God. Therefore, he sends his manifestations, we call them prophets or teachers, so that we can learn of him. In a Baha'i faith, we're not allowed to create any kind of a dogma. Everyone's supposed to go to the pure source and kind of glean the meanings of the pure source.
Okay. So in that case, Baha'i leans more towards spiritual. Have you ever had a personal type of encounter with something that would be like the Holy Spirit, where you feel that you're in the presence of something that either affirmed life for you or transformed you in some way? Can you speak to any of that?
I do prayer every day. And by praying, I can't say I have had voices talking to me. I haven't had that, but I've had where my heart fills with joy or assurance by saying prayer. One thing that's talking about Baha'i faith is like, every time you want to make a decision, you sit and pray about it. And then you meditate. Meditate is when you receive answers. Prayer, you supplicate into God. You're begging God for guidance. Then meditation is you're listening and those guidance comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you arrive at the decision, then you just act as though it's been answered.
Right.
Then God will make it right. So that's, I've done many times.
This show is not an income producing show. I have to secure advertising and sponsorships for it, donations of some kind. And I trust God because I believe that the show is a blessing from God. I'm able to glorify God through this show. And I know that that was his will. So in that sense, I trust him. But yet, on a day-to-day, on an hour-to-hour, I feel like I have to do something. Mm-hmm. I can't just let time go and the bills come and I pay the bills and then there's no income. So what I do is I might make some phone calls. I might send out some letters.
I think I understand what you're trying to say. There's a saying that says, trust in God, but tie your camel. I think it's an Arabic, in other words, proverb. In other words, you can't say, oh, I pray to God and sit down and wait for it to come. You have to take action. You have to have the volition to do something.
Right. And faith without works is dead. And then that's in the New Testament. And then in the Talmud, the rabbi, I think it was Eleazar says, it is not for you to complete the task, but neither are you free to refrain from it. I really do believe in activating your faith and your spirit. And, it's one thing to pray and be very polite about it. But I believe, for me, that you got to get very demonstrative and get yourself excited. You're familiar with Tony Robbins, right?
I have heard the name.
He's an inspirational coach kind of guy. And he's the most famous one on the planet that does this. He's been at it since the 80s, before it was ever a thing. But one of the things Tony Robbins does, he has these seminars, he gets people together and he gets them moving. Literally, he starts it out and he starts yelling into his microphone. He's like, everybody get up, jump around, run around the room, and then go back to your seats. How do you feel? And everybody's kind of pumped up. And he said, yeah, because motion is emotion. And he's really right about that. You got to get yourself stirred up. That's why in like Holy Roller churches, there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of running around and the music's playing, and it's to elevate your spirit, because once your emotions go higher, you feel like you're kind of out of yourself. And when you're out of yourself, you're not in that body, you're more spirit. And now when you're more spirit, you're more in touch with the spirit. I think that's kind of what it's all about. I don't know if anybody's put it out there the way I have, but that's kind of what's going on. And so I guess what I was trying to get at with you was just to say, while you're waiting on God, is there something on a more day-to-day that you do that soothes your soul while you're waiting on God?
If anytime you feel down and depressed, get up and go and serve someone that is worse than you.
Yeah.
Then you realize what you have, and it becomes energizes you.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I feel like if I get up and go serve somebody, go visit someone that is lonely, or go visit someone that have problems more than worse than I do, it uplifts my soul while I'm waiting for the door to open for me.
If you're walking on the street, you're on your way into the store, and you see somebody just bereft, just very emotional, and you go over to the person to try to console this person, and they say to you, I don't know what I'm going to do. They tell you about this tragedy which just occurred, and they're just really having a rough time. And like, what do you say to that person?
I think number one is try to listen to them. I think listening, it's a good skill to have. And I'm learning to try to see what they're going through. A lot of times it's not good to give advice, depending what the situation is, not to give good advice. It's good to kind of sit with the person. If you have to offer them a prayer, let's pray together to kind of calm them down. They themselves may arrive at their solution faster than, and to invite them to have a coffee or something together.
Mehran, thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate you being here. To my audience, this is Todd Rheingold, the hopeful aspirant. Thank you for joining me today. Let's all aspire to reach higher and stay inspired. God bless.